Hi YouTube, haircut. As usual, I have very little time, so let's get started. Let's start with a quote from our favorite reference source, Wikipedia. Wikipedia states that Huxley stated that Brave New World was a representation of where he was worried that society was going. However, in the part of the book that I've just read, there's a scene in which there's a mob that is then subdued with soma, which I find interesting, because it seems to me like Huxley is suggesting that in this society, people can be calmed down with something other than violence, which seems like more a utopian thing than a dystopian thing. And I find that interesting because, as we know, Huxley considered the world state to be a dystopia. Let me quote the book. 2 minutes later, the voice and the soma vapor had produced their effect. In tears, the Deltas were kissing and hugging one another. Even Helmholtz and the Savage were almost crying. Page 215. Now, one thing I find interesting in this scene is that Helmholtz actually participates in the mob. Because at first I thought that Bernard was the outcast in society, you know, and he was the one that was, like, the protagonist who was gonna, like, defy all the expectations and, like, change the world or, like, die dramatically. But now I'm starting to wonder, what if it's Helmholtz along with John the Savage? You know, I mean, how would that change the book? Like, people, like, I guess the perspective that I, or people in general, like, are reading the book. Like, coming to the realization that it's not actually Bernard, it's Helmholtz, would that change the perspective at all? I'm not sure. Taking my last thoughts and switching gears a little, I also find it interesting that in Brave New World, there's no really clear protagonist. In the hero's journey, because we all love that, in the hero's journey, there's a clear protagonist, right? It's the person who goes through this cycle. The person who literally, like, goes into the underworld and then comes out with the reward and defeats the bad guy and blah, 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 blah. But Brave New World doesn't exactly follow the hero's journey, so I kind of want to take a look at where it's parallel and where it's not, because I think that might be interesting. Like I said earlier, I don't have a lot of time, and I don't feel like going and looking up a chart and making sure it's decent and blah, blah, blah. But let's just go over the hero's journey, basically, right now. So the hero's journey, first thing is there's, like, the ordinary world, and then there's the call to action, which can be voluntary or involuntary by the protagonist. And the protagonist gets called into some quest, and then goes through a series of trials, enters the underworld, right? And then, like, has the, I think it's called Meeting the Goddess. Oh, there's also a mentor that the hero meets, like, at the beginning of the story, and then he or she has to, like, meet basically the main antagonist and face him and defeat him, her, or it, and then the hero then gets the reward, comes out of the underworld, and returns to the ordinary world. I hope Allison doesn't kill me for not being able to recite that, like, word for word. So anyway, as I was thinking about this, the first parallel that I noticed was going to the reservation, which could be considered going into the underworld. If you've read the book, Lenina forgets her soma. Bernard doesn't have any originally, although then they get some, like, halfway through their stay, I think, something like that. But they do. It's a whole other world for them, and it's not civilized, right? And it has disgusting things like old people. Disgusting, I know. So then, of course, right after this, I thought, well, Bernard brings back John and his mom, right? So, can John be considered a reward, is my question. I mean, he does get Bernard into parties, right? And he helps Bernard succeed with the ladies. But, for some reason, I'm still kind of hesitant to call John a reward. Because, I don't know, I mean, part of it is because he's, like, a person. But, I don't know, he seems to kind of almost be like an unreliable reward, like that scene where he refuses to come out of his room. He has difficulties understanding the world state's rules, like when Lenina, like, makes advances on him, he really doesn't understand what she's doing, and he's freaked out. because he comes from a different world, so he definitely comes with his own problems, and he's sort of like a trade-off for Bernard. So I really have to wrap this up because it's late, and, you know, I need my sleep, and etc., etc. But, like, favorite, etc., whatever. No big deal if you don't. This is technically the last vlog that I'm required to do for my English project, but hopefully I'll be back next week with an extra credit post. See you then, YouTube.